And the fact that they would have kept this from the American people so that they could what? They could keep power, they could run the government. There needs to be accountability. There needs to be a reckoning for this.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM from Monday, May 19th. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm joined by RCP co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington bureau chief Carl Cannon. So guys, Sunday night, the Biden family announced that the former president is suffering from what they call an aggressive form of prostate cancer. This comes on the heels of the release of the audio recordings of Biden's special counsel interview when he was back in office. And it's also in advance of Jake Tapper's book, which is coming out this week. So lots of different reactions. But here's David Axelrod on CNN on Sunday. He was on a phone call with host Frederica Whitfield.
His medical condition now, his announced medical condition now, do you believe that silences or delays a lot of conversations about his, last year and a half of his presidency for now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think those conversations are going to happen, but they should be more muted and set aside for now as he's struggling through this.
So, Tom, there's one reaction. Should we set this conversation aside while he struggles through this cancer?
Absolutely not. I mean, look, that's why they did this. There's no coincidence that this was the timing of this announcement to generate sympathy for Biden. And look, I feel bad for him. We all feel bad. And, you don't ever wish anybody to get cancer and you want him to get better. And I'm sure he's got a tough road ahead. But that does not excuse, right, the media's participation in this cover-up. And this is just another layer of it. I mean, we've seen plenty of experts. Ezekiel Emanuel was on Morning Joe this morning. He's no fan of, he is a Democrat. He is a fan of this administration. Said there's no way that you could have this stage 4 cancer with a 9 score on the Gleason scale just appear in the last 100 days or 200 days. This is a cancer that would take years to develop. And he speculated he had it probably as early as 2020, if not earlier than that. We did have the clip of Biden saying in 2022, I think at this event, he said that like other people of his generation, he had cancer and the administration waved it off. So I think this raises more questions about what was his actual state of health? Did they cover this up? Did they keep this from the American people? How long has he had cancer? I think these are questions that have to be asked. We can't just say, oh, we're not going to deal with this for 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever until Biden, whatever happens with him. We need to have answers to that now. I mean, this is a huge scandal. The fact that he had cancer, he had dementia, he had all of these issues, and the administration covered it up, and the press largely went along with it.
Yeah, Carl, the timing is fortuitous, I guess, from one point of view. And again, none of us sympathy for his family, all that sort of stuff. But just the politics of it. What's going on here? I mean, what are the Biden people trying to get done?
Well, that's a good question. But when I heard about it, I focused on what Tom was talking about, which is remember when Biden blurted out that he had cancer. And this was seen as a misstep. He misspoke and, just a glitch. But it's not the kind of thing people say by accident, I have cancer. And so what it turns out is apparently Biden was telling the truth about his health, and his staff didn't want him to tell the truth. Tom used that word cover up. It's not a word I use very often, but that does seem what was going on here. In terms of blaming the media, I don't think we had any way to know that he actually had prostate cancer. But so I don't think this is a press story. But David Axelrod, I know him a little bit, and he's a very decent guy, and he's speaking from the heart here. But what Tom said, I think is right. There are still questions, lots of them, about the people who propped up Joe Biden while he was president. What their motivations were and how far they took it, and and who they lied to exactly.
Yeah. Well, Tom, you mentioned this interview this morning on Morning Joe with Zeke Emanuel, who's a doctor and an oncologist, I guess. And this is what he said. He said Biden did not develop it in the last 100 to 200 days. He had it while he was president. He probably had it at the start of his presidency in 21. And then he went on to say this: either they didn't test for it, or they tested for it and didn't report it, or we didn't get the information as a public. So again, it does sort of like double down on the story. It doesn't. None of this is alleviating pressure on Biden. It seems like to me it's increasing the need for answers, and the push on the press is probably legitimate at this point.
Absolutely. And the fact that they look, none of those scenarios, if they didn't test for it, that's not good. If they didn't test for it and found it and didn't report it, that's obviously not good as well. It also makes this decision for Biden to run again. If he knew he had been diagnosed with cancer in 2020 or 2021, or even, when he said he had cancer in 2022, and yet he still decided that he would run for re-election. I mean, that's astonishing. It boggles the mind that the people around him, his wife, who clearly would have knowledge of this, and probably some of his other closest staffers, Mike Donilon, Ron Klain, Jake Sullivan, all of these folks, if they knew that as well, and they encouraged him to run for president again, it is a huge, huge problem and a huge scandal. And we need to know the answers to that. I mean, we can't just say this is, let bygones be bygones. Right. This guy was ostensibly running the country, had his finger on, the nuclear codes, and he may not have even known, exactly what was going on, but the people around him did. And the fact that they would have kept this from the American people so that they could They could keep power, they could run the government. There needs to be accountability. There needs to be a reckoning for this. And I think the Democrats are going to pay a price if they don't actively engage on this and try and help get to the bottom of this.
Well, Andy, let's not assume we know more than we know. Zeke Emanuel would say that he had prostate cancer. I know plenty of men who have prostate cancer and function perfectly well, and it doesn't affect your ability to reason, and it's often cured. What may have happened in the last 100 days is that he got a bad diagnosis, that the treatment hasn't been working. But Tom's point about transparency is the real important one. Everybody in this country wants some medical privacy. It's the law of the land that you're entitled to it. But with one exception, presidency. That's just not a job where you get that. Donald Trump wouldn't release his taxes. Nobody wants to release their taxes, but you're supposed to release your taxes if you're running for president, and you're supposed to make an honest accounting of your physical to the American people for the reasons that we've been talking about. Yeah, I remember Paul Tsongas ran for president. I guess that was 92 when he was running against Jerry Brown was in that campaign. Bill Clinton, of course, who was later nominated and elected president. But he wasn't forthcoming, and about his health, and he wouldn't have lived. He wouldn't have lived to serve out a term or two terms. I forget exactly when he passed, but it sensitized me to the need for these candidates to level with the American people.
Yeah. Well, part of what gives this whole story, legs, I guess, is this release on Friday. Axios or Politico, I guess, released on Friday the interview with Robert Hur on the classified documents case. You remember Hur called Biden a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with poor memory. Here's just a little bit of the tape that was released.
I hadn't walked away from the idea that I may run for office again. Or if I ran again, I'd be running for president. And so what was happening though, once both died, got amazed. There is 2015. 2015 he died. 2015. I think it's 2015.
I'm not sure the months are, but I think that was That's right, Mr. President.
So that's just a little bit of the clip. They're talking about the time frame is 2017. Beau Biden died in 2015. It was a 5-hour interview over 2 days, Tom, but they pushed back pretty strongly on this fact that, if you remember, they pushed back at the time. The idea that Joe Biden wouldn't remember the date of his son's death was sort of like used as a talking point to say, oh, of course he remembered that. When you hear this tape, it does sound like he was having trouble with his memory.
Right. And we got the transcript of this in March of 24. So we had already read about this, but, hearing it in Joe Biden's own words, audio is always more impactful than just the transcripts, and video is usually even more impactful than just audio. But yeah, I mean, it sounded terrible. And I think it actually, again, revealed what we now know. I mean, Robert Hur was savage. This guy had a sterling reputation. In fact, one of the people, we talked to knew him for a long time and said this guy had just an absolutely impeccable reputation. Well, they savaged him. They said he was being partisan and he was, doing things that were unethical by including this language in the report, et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out that he was telling the truth. And I think everybody knew it. So this whole thing, it's just part of the entire thing. I do think, though, and I've said this before, the thing about Biden's mental acuity, this was not a cover-up. I mean, a cover-up assumes that there's something that is hidden from the American people that you keep hidden. Biden's mental fitness was not a secret. The American people, it was clear in the polling data. This was just straight up gaslighting of the American people, right? Saying, don't believe your lying eyes. Yeah, you see him fall and he's recognizing dead women at congressional events, but yeah, he's fine. He's sharp as a tack behind the scenes. And I mean, they were just lying to us right to our faces.
Yeah.
The cancer diagnosis is more of a cover-up. That's something that we didn't know. And to Carl's point, we couldn't have necessarily known. And so for that reason, I think there's a bit of a distinction there.
All right. Well, Carl, any reaction to the release of these audio tapes?
Yes, I think that these, the ladies of The View and these talking heads on MSNBC and these Democrats in Congress and people in the White House all owe Robert Hur an apology. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, I just
don't hold your breath, Carl.
Yeah. Well, just for the record, a Biden spokesman, Kelly Scully, told CNN this. She said the transcripts were released by the Biden administration more than a year ago. The audio does nothing but confirm what was already public. So that's the Biden's.
That's their story, and they're sticking to it.
Sticking to it. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. Don't go away. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. And gentlemen, this Mexican toll ship sailed into the Brooklyn Bridge this weekend. It's a tragedy. It cost 2 sailors' lives. It injured 17 more. And Chuck Schumer says it may have been Trump's fault. He put out a statement saying this. He said, quote, "We know there has been meddling by the Trump administration into USCG staffing, and we didn't need to know how this might have impacted the events of last night from a command, communications, and local coordination level. There are indications that this service may not be fully or adequately functional in light of a hiring freeze." So
talking about the Coast Guard there? Is that what he's talking about?
Yeah, he's talking about the Coast Guard, and he's talking about, the Coast Guard controls the river. Anyway, Carl, it was a little early out of the gate on this. He's sort of been pretty roundly condemned for this, but what do you think?
Andy, I don't know why you're criticizing Chuck Schumer, even by implication. He said the exact same thing when the ship was knocked down, when the container ship knocked down the bridge in Baltimore. He said the exact same thing about the Democratic administration. So he's entirely consistent.
Tom?
Well, Carl stole my line. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, clownishly so to say, try and blame this on Trump. I mean, I know, the Democratic base, they want their leaders to fight against Trump and be part of the resistance and all that. But you got to do that within sort of certain bounds, I would think. This just was such a wild miss. I mean, what could Trump possibly have to do with this? And like trying to pin this on him. The ship had apparently a mechanical failure, and look, it was a spectacular accident and tragedy, as you mentioned, that was captured on video from about 100 different angles, and so it became this spectacle. But to try and blame this on Trump is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Andy, Schumer's comments remind me there was a meme going around on X last week, and I forget what it was. A guy's car was wrecked or something had happened like that, and he said, and he tweeted, my first instinct was to blame Donald Trump for this, but I know deep down it was caused by global warming.
Well, this, as Tom points out, that apparently it was a mechanical failure, and it is a tragedy. And it's if you watch the video, it's horrible. These sailors are all up in the rigging, which is what they do on tall ships when they're sort of doing these kinds of appearances. And just if you've been around boats, which I spent a fair amount of time in boats, when your engine goes off and you're in a river or you're any place where there's a current, it's hell, whether you're in a small boat or a big boat. But anyway, this is pretty tragic, and I feel for them. But I do think, Tom, is it just Chuck Schumer is sort of feels like he's under so much pressure because he went along with the vote last fall to what was the vote? It was to
keep the government open.
Keep the government open, right? And might be facing a Senate challenge, right?
Right, but and again, I'm sure there's a portion of folks who look at him and be like, "Good job, Chuck. Way to get Trump on this one." But I think the vast majority of folks would say this is, there are plenty of things for Democrats to attack Trump on legitimately, and if you want to be part of the resistance, you can. There's no shortage of targets, but to go after this just makes him look foolish, I think. And he probably, deep down, he probably knows it, but he decided to do it anyway. So,
yeah. Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about was this Truth Social post. Came out at 1:34 a.m. this morning. This is on Monday. This is Donald Trump. He wants to investigate the boss and a few other big stars. This was the tweet. He said, "How much did Kamala Harris pay Bruce Springsteen for his poor performance during her campaign for president?" These are all in caps, by the way, so I should be shouting, but I'm not going to do that. But why did he accept that money if he is such a fan of hers? Isn't that a major and illegal campaign contribution? What about Beyonce? And how much went to Oprah and Bono? I'm going to call for a major investigation into this matter. Carl, there is a lot of money at stake, I guess, that was spent on these Hollywood events, including $1 million to Oprah Winfrey's production company, Harpo. But he's got it out for the boss, I guess.
Yeah, but what's the crime here? This is he want to make it an issue. He wants to talk about it. Great. He should talk about it. He should make fun of the Democrats for how they spend money, and he should make fun of wealthy Democrats for taking money from a campaign in which they said, it was a moral imperative and the whole existential threat to democracy. If their candidate didn't win, then maybe they should do it for free. That's all grist for conversation. But this criminalizing, this weaponizing the justice system, I thought this is what Trump didn't want to do. I thought this is what he objected to. It reminds me when Bill Clinton was president and had these 2 or 3 special prosecutors looking into the administration, and a couple of them just went off the rails. And James Carville and I were talking on the phone, and I won't try to imitate him. He has that great voice, but he said, "Carl, they're criminalizing policy differences." I said, "Yeah, James, that's what the Republicans have been saying you've been doing with the special prosecutor law since Watergate." "Well, we maybe should have paid more attention." Yeah, right. But to go and do exactly months later what you say is done to you is it lacks self-awareness, let's just say.
Tom, you feel that way? Or is this turnabout as fair play?
Look, my attitude toward this is like, so you've got, Bruce Springsteen over here and, Kamala Harris and all that. By the way, you won that election. You were complete, total victory. And over here, you've got literally the largest scandal in the history of the American public with Joe Biden's mental fitness and the cover-up of his cancer. All this stuff's happening. and he's focused over here on something that, seems really, really small potatoes. So I don't get it. I don't understand. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure a lot of people understand what drives Trump and to send out these missives at, as you mentioned, 1:30 in the morning and just start a firestorm about something that seems completely, out of left field. I mean, I know he's talked about Bruce Springsteen before, so it's not totally out of left field, but nevertheless, he's putting emphasis and drawing attention to that and away from something that is way bigger, way more important, and quite frankly, way worse for the Democrats.
Yeah. Well, there is, it's probably a legitimate question. When they pay Oprah Winfrey's production company $1 million, and then Oprah says, well, I wasn't getting paid personally. If you could ask a question about that. I think they paid Beyonce $165,000, and I don't know what Beyonce did other than show up. I mean, she didn't. I mean, at least Oprah actually
she didn't show up. Remember, we kept hearing she was going to show up at the convention in this place and that place.
So, I guess there is some pay for play. Although I do think, and I remember that Bruce Springsteen appearance, which if they paid anything at all, they got ripped off. He was terrible. But I don't think, he didn't have any production charges or something. But he did say this, just so people know what we're talking about. He was in Manchester, England. He's starting his tour, and he said, in my home, the America I love, the America I've written about, and has become a beacon of hope and liberty for 250 years, is currently in the hands of a corrupt, incompetent, and treasonous administration. So the boss isn't mincing words, Carl, but I guess we'll see what happens with this. But I do think that the other question I have for you, Carl, is what is he doing at 1:30 in the morning tweeting about this kind of stuff? I mean, who keeps that kind of schedule?
Well, it's begun to dawn on me that he has a stable of young mini-me's and who come up with this stuff. And you can't tell who's doing it because it's all in his voice. The all caps, they get that, the faux outrage, but the timestamp, this is probably somebody in California, is my guess, and had a couple of beers and thought this would be good. I'm guessing. I don't think
that's how it works, Carl.
You think Donald Trump is doing this himself at 1:30 in the morning?
I do.
Well,
he might be dictating it to someone who's actually doing the typing, but I'm pretty sure Donald Trump is the one it's his voice, it's his message. He's not farming that out to some intern in California who's.
Well, you'd think with running the U.S. military, the Kennedy Center, Major League Baseball, all these jobs he's given himself, he'd be too busy for that. But maybe you're right, Tom.
Right.
I think ultimately it's just, he can't resist the bait. And Bruce Springsteen gave it to him, right? He says something crappy about Trump. And so Trump's like, I'm going to, I'll hit you back. And here we go. Yeah. So that's why we end up with a post on True Social at 1:34 in the morning.
Right. All right. Well, guys, we're going to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom, but don't go away. When we come back, Tom's going to talk to White House correspondent Phil Wegmann.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Phil Wegmann. He is our White House reporter. Mr. Wegmann, how are you?
Not bad. Busy news day.
Busy news day. So let's talk about it. I think first and most importantly, Trump had his phone call with Vladimir Putin. He put up a post on True Social after. He said it was a 2-hour conversation. It went, quote, very well, and said that talks are ceasefire talks are set to start immediately between the Russians and the Ukrainians, but it didn't seem like the U.S. was going to be involved. What else do we know about what went down on that phone call?
So we know it was a 2-hour phone call to try and figure out a way to end a 3-year land war. This is Donald Trump, who is taking a victory lap over his ability to get Zelensky and Putin to the negotiation table. The subtext here, though, is what we heard from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt this morning when she said that the president was wary and frustrated by both parties here. And then over the weekend, Vice President Vance who was in Rome to see the new Pope, who could have a role to play in all of this, mediating those talks. He said that he would not underplay the possibility that the United States walks away, that Russia doesn't actually, in his words, stop killing innocent people, and that a deal doesn't come through. The criticism from Democrats here, though, which I think is notable and there's some truth to it, is that Donald Trump hasn't forced any concessions. He hasn't gotten Putin to make any, certainly. Instead, what we've seen from the president is, he's celebrating the beginning of talks. On the flip side, those are talks that President Biden was never able to achieve.
The other thing that jumped out to me, Phil, you mentioned that the Pope has apparently maybe hosting these talks and play some sort of role as mediator. But the other thing that jumped out to me, Phil, was mentioned in there that Russia wants to do big business with the United States. And this is back to, Trump just got back from this trip in the Middle East, which is all about doing deals and really sort of his global vision of everybody being, making money by trading together and drawing, nations closer together. And that's how he's going to achieve peace. And it seemed like that was part of his discussion with Putin as well.
Yeah, Donald Trump has one gear, and it's always going to be the business trade gear. We just saw his Middle East trip where he was not just talking about trade agreements, but talking specifics in some instances. Actually, 100 Boeing airplanes here, oil there. This is something that he's very comfortable with, and it sort of gives you an insight into his mindset going into this. The very first part of his talks with Ukraine didn't have to do with security so much as it had to do with that minerals deal that finally got signed with both Ukraine and Russia. In that readout of his call, he was saying, look, return to peace, and then we can all, return to trade and start making a lot of money. I think, though, it's important to keep in mind the nature of the two regimes. Ukraine, they're an imperfect democracy, but Zelensky has said that he's more than happy to step away if that leads to peace. Putin, on the other hand, he's not going anywhere, and he knows that at the end of this war, he has to have something to show the Russian people. Otherwise, his hold on power could be threatened.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to a couple other newsy topics of the day. One is the big, beautiful bill, which passed the House Budget Committee last night, still has to go through rules, I think, and it's got a couple more hurdles. But Caroline Leavitt started her press conference today by talking about it for, like a 5-minute soliloquy on why this big, beautiful bill needs to be passed and Republicans need to pass it. What's the dynamic on the Hill, and how much momentum does the big, beautiful bill now have?
Yeah, the main dynamic here is that through the reconciliation process, the White House is negotiating with Republicans, not Democrats. So this is their one shot to use unified government to get what it is that they want. And they see this as a once in a century opportunity to do things like border security, hire more ICE and Border Patrol agents, finish the wall. But then they are focusing on codifying the 2017 tax cuts and adding to them, specifically no tax on tips, the overtime exceptions, this ability to write off the insurance on an American automobile purchased here. This really is, more than anything, I think, the Trump White House's effort to solidify and codify these low propensity voters who came to Trump in the last election. They see this as an opportunity to bring them into the fold, and they want to have something to show them ahead of the next midterms. They want Donald Trump to be able to deliver. The stick in the mud currently, though, is conservatives who are saying, look, we don't want to greenlight a bunch of new spending. There needs to be some cuts to things like the Green New Deal and some of these, what they say are giveaways of the previous administration. And the White House has been willing to negotiate with those conservatives, folks like Chip Roy. The other sticking point may end up being some of these Republicans from blue states who are pushing for an increase in the state and local tax deduction.
Right, the SALT tax, which would add to the deficit, right? I mean, if you had to guess right now, Phil, what are the odds that this thing actually gets done and gets passed in the next couple of months? Because I think there is a sense out there, and I've seen some commentary around the fact that this is taking too long, that American public is sort of frustrated by the inaction. Certainly Trump supporters are frustrated by it. Is this a 50-50 thing? Is it 60-40? Where would you put the odds on this thing getting passed?
My expectation is that it would get out of the House. The question is what happens to it eventually in the Senate. Do the senators increase spending or reduce some of these cuts in such a way that it makes it unacceptable to fiscal hawks? We'll see. I think everyone on the Hill is aware that this is Donald Trump's one shot here. But to your point a second ago, the MAGA base, they were delighted to see Donald Trump go it alone and remake the executive branch in his own image, use executive authority. But when it comes to economics, right? He decided to go ahead with tariffs before tax cuts. It wasn't that way last time around, and certainly not to the same extent with this trade war. They put the cart before the horse. And so now I think, if anything, that has pushed the Hill to deliver. The expectation and the hope is sometime around the 4th of July, but we'll wait and see.
That's still a long ways off. And by the way, you didn't give me a number. Give me a number. Come on.
I don't know.
Stop
I think
beating around.
Look, I would say 65-35. Speaker Mike Johnson is haunted by the failure of Obamacare repeal last time around. He doesn't want to see that happen again. He's working with a pretty slim majority, but he's got his conference on his side.
Okay, 65-35. You heard it here first. We'll check back in with Phil as this progresses. All right. Last subject, Phil. Big Supreme Court decision siding with the Trump administration, allowing them to effectively deport about 350,000 Venezuelans who are here under temporary protected status, TPS. It looks like the ruling, from what I saw, there was only one dissenter, Ketanji Brown Jackson, but other than that, it was, 8-1 then? I mean, a pretty resounding victory for Trump in his ongoing effort to use mass deportations for people who were here illegally. What's the view from the White House on this? I assume they're ecstatic about it.
White House is thrilled about this, but the subtext here is important as well, because we have seen simmering. I don't even think simmering is the right word. We've seen open hostility towards the judiciary when Donald Trump has been checked on the deportation front. I think, if anything, that eases some of this pressure. Certainly, his plans for deportation are much larger than 350,000. But in the short term, I think that will lead to a bit friendlier relations between the Oval Office and the folks over there at the Supreme Court.
Is the agenda, the deportation agenda, still? I mean, it seems like it's still, top of mind here. Although there has been, they came out of the gates really hard, but then things have kind of slowed down. We had all these court challenges. Do you see this as reigniting and allowing them to sort of speed things back up, or is it still, bogged down and going to proceed at a pace that, again, is that I think a lot of Trump supporters would say is not going fast enough?
I mean, this is an administration that has talked openly about suspending the writ of habeas corpus. There's no denying that their appetite is for immediate action. I think that the limit here, if it's not the judiciary, what is going to limit their efforts is they don't have the money and they don't have the beds to put into action the plans of the president. I mean, Tom Homan, the border czar, has told me this several times on the White House driveway there. They need more resources because they've effectively stopped the flow of illegal immigration across the southern border. They stopped that entirely. Now they want to make it permanent by building the wall. But then their focus right now is getting the 10 million illegal immigrants across during the Biden administration. They want to get them out. And they're not going to be able to do that without a lot more money in this one big, beautiful bill.
One last thing in the big, beautiful bill that Caroline Leavitt talked about was the air traffic control, modernizing the system. And obviously, this has been a huge topic of late, given all the outages that have gone on in Philadelphia. We had some in Denver. I think people are getting a little bit nervous about, flying when there does seem to be this systemic problem. I would assume there would be bipartisan support for that. I mean, again, it's all wrapped up in the same thing, but that's something that, Sean Duffy had been talking about over the weekend on some of these shows, how important that is. Talk a little bit about that.
My 8 p.m. flight out of DCA to Wisconsin was delayed until 4 a.m. and eventually canceled at 4:15. American Airlines, if you're listening, I'm very salty about that. But like, if you think about air traffic controllers, right, they're one of these things that I think normal people just expect, right? They don't spend all of their time focused on government. They don't have the luxury to cross-reference the New York Times with the Wall Street Journal or to, watch C-SPAN. They want fire, police, water, all these normal responsibilities of government. And then when they see things like this, that they expect shouldn't happen at a moment when, you can get on your phone and order anything you want, same day delivery through Amazon, but you can't leave the airport as scheduled. I think that's a frustration. And certainly the transportation secretary, he wants to get to work. He says he's going to solve the problem. Well, we'll have a pretty easy test to see if he, was successful. Either the planes leave on time or they don't.
Yeah, it seems like this is something that should be fast tracked and shouldn't wait. And maybe it should be broken off and done separately because it's an urgent need. And I think there is enough bipartisan support to get it moving and not have to wait till July when this big, beautiful bill gets passed. All right, we got to leave it there. Phil Wegmann, White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Phil, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
All right, going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, talking now with Myra Adams, one of my favorite Floridians and favorite converts. I'll get to that in a minute, but she was a Republican. Myra, I guess I consider you independent now.
I'm homeless. I'm politically homeless.
But you wrote a column last week that really struck me. I hadn't seen it anywhere, and it was about this rivalry that's sort of under the radar that President Trump kind of maybe started on purpose between Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. So just tell our listeners about your column and what you thought. And I'll ask you a couple of questions about it.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I wrote it on the Hill, and it was sparked by a May 4th Meet the Press interview that Trump had. And on May 4th, which is so interesting because it was even before his 100 days, he mentioned that his successors, the ones he believed would be best positioned to be his successors, were J.D. Vance, vice president, which of course made sense, although he kind of downplayed it before in February. He said he didn't necessarily think Vance was going to be his successor. So he's kind of been all over the map on this. But he mentioned J.D. Vance. But then he also mentioned Marco Rubio, which I think really threw people for a loop because what he did now is set up a rivalry. And of course, 2028 is so far away. But yet the reality show aspect of it is something I believe Trump really enjoys. And also he enjoys setting up rivalries between the two. They generate news, he can intervene. So that's why I think he did it.
I think that's right. But I as I was reading your column, I thought, okay, there's one factor we maybe shouldn't rule out, which is Trump sort of thinks aloud. I mean, sometimes he just says stuff and maybe he's stuck with it, but he says things he doesn't. He's a president. You don't find this every day. I guess Joe Biden used to do this occasionally. He starts a sentence and he doesn't know where that sentence is going to end up. But you don't think this was an example of that. You think this was deliberate.
Who knows what Donald Trump really thinks? All we know is he said it.
Yeah.
And when he said it, it did set off a chain of events. And in fact, J.D. Vance, I believe, said, and I read it several places, that he said, no, there's no rivalry between the two. We're great friends. We're teammates. So who knows? I mean, he put them both in a very awkward situation. Whether it's true or not, it happened. And so because he now has said not only J.D. Vance could be my successor, but Rubio, that, of course, just sets up a whole nother chain of events that basically gets people paying attention, even though, of course, we know 2028, anything can happen. And, of course, history is against J.D. Vance being the nominee who could win Trump's third term, because the last time it happened was by 2028, it would be 40 years ago that George H.W. Bush won what we call Ronald Reagan's third term. It's not happened since.
You used that as an example in your column, and I was struck by it because, in a sense, it's a historical analogy that makes sense because I don't remember, a candidate. Maybe maybe Barack Obama's an exception, but a president who had such total control of his party, the way Reagan did, and the way Trump did. And some of the old Reaganites fought Trump, but it's now his party. So I thought maybe he could pull that off. The other thing, though, I want your thoughts on this because you live in Florida. Marco Rubio was your senator till recently. There was some talk that Donald Trump wanted to choose Rubio as his running mate this time around, and that he didn't because of the constitutional, the problem, you'd have to probably forfeit Florida's, electoral college votes, and nobody's going to do that. And then there was some talk about, I even talked to Rubio about this myself, maybe him moving to Northern Virginia, which would be awkward for a sitting senator, or Donald Trump, maybe he's going to run from New Jersey, but he's not going to do that. So, but made me think that some of that talk was right, that Trump had considered Rubio as a vice president.
Yes, he did. And there are a couple factors there. One, Rubio was not considered MAGA. Okay. And that's really, really important here because J.D. Vance was considered MAGA and his biggest champion is Don Jr. And I'm going to say Don Jr., Donald Trump Jr. I'm going to say his name because he is going to be a factor and who is going to get the nomination. He's the one that really convinced his father that Rubio was the future of MAGA. And so more than the constitutional problem with Rubio and Trump having the same residency, that could have been easily massaged. He could have left the state. And in fact, Dick Cheney did something similar. He literally he changed his voting registration to Wyoming.
Well, but that's where he'd been a member of Congress, so it wasn't quite the stretch.
Right, but the point is that could have easily been, there was a way to work around that. But the main thing was that J.D. Vance was considered the future of MAGA, according to Don Jr., who will again play a very, very big role in who will succeed Donald Trump in 2028 and who will get his endorsement also.
All right, let me ask you a couple of questions about that. First of all, is there any thought that Don Jr. would run himself in his own right? And secondly, follow-up question to that. Wait. And if he didn't, would you have to promise to put him on the ticket as your Veep in order to get the nomination? Two-part question.
Who knows? But certainly, this is a reality show. Okay, there is going to be twists and turns. It's going to run for at least 4 seasons, until 2028, until mid-2028. This reality show is going to be running. And there are a lot of colorful characters. And one of the main colorful characters is Don Jr., because maybe Trump will say, nobody is fit to succeed me as much as my son, which is going to be very Shakespearean. It's going to be fascinating to watch. But Donald Trump loves the reality show aspect of it. He's a showman. This keeps headlines. It keeps his name in the news. It keeps his son's name in the news. It just keeps people interested, keeps people like us talking about it. Who knows? Who knows? Anything can happen, but it's fascinating to watch.
You're listening to Myra Adams, a Republican, former Republican from Florida and a columnist for The Hill. We carry her stuff from time to time. I mentioned at the top of the show that she was my favorite convert. Now we're gonna switch gears. We got a couple minutes left, and we're gonna talk about religion. Myra was raised Jewish. She's become a Christian, and she writes about religion in a thoughtful way. We have a piece on Real Clear Religion that she wrote that we link to, and it's about her pretty much everybody's favorite Old Testament prophet, Isaiah. And you have a great line in there. Myra writes about religion in a way that's accessible to people who are not, didn't major in theology. But just come to faith with their heart. Jesus, what you said, Isaiah was Jesus' favorite, was his VIP fan. What was the phrase?
Yeah, it was Jesus. Isaiah was Jesus' favorite VIP fan.
Yeah.
The name of the piece is Isaiah's Greatest Hits.
Right.
And every Sunday I write a Bible study on townhall.com. I've been writing it since February of 2020. So this was my weekly Bible study, and I'm very honored that Real Clear Religion usually picks it up on Monday. And I have readers all over the world, and some of them don't like me at all. I always say, I joke, I write about religion and politics, so therefore everybody hates me. But in this case, Isaiah's Greatest Hits is interesting because Isaiah was a prophet so beyond his time is he wrote about Jesus before he was born. He wrote in great, incredibly excruciating detail about what Jesus went through on the cross. Isaiah 53 is literally talks about Jesus suffering on the cross. And of course,
before it happened.
Before 800 years before Jesus was born, Isaiah was writing about what he would undergo on the cross. So Isaiah 53 is a very, very famous chapter within the book of Isaiah. And the other thing, of course, is you listen to Handel's Messiah. Many of the lyrics from that are also from Isaiah. But he's also written some other, beautiful verses. And again, he was a prophet, so he wrote what God told him to write. One of the verses that I don't think most people realize even comes from the Bible is, "Let us reason together." And that's used so often, and people don't even realize that came from Isaiah. It's a fascinating. It's a great chapter, but it's long. So I made it like his greatest hits.
It's a bit of wisdom. Let us reason together that we could use in American politics. So when Myra and I were young people, it was said that you have a dinner party. The 3 topics you should never discuss: politics, religion, and sex. Well, we've done 2 of the 3 today. Myra, thanks for joining us. And I refer everybody to her column, Real Clear Religion, Isaiah's Greatest Hits. And you've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief. And join us again tomorrow at the same time, 6 p.m. in the East, 3 p.m. in California.